Alice, do you want to go ahead and get started?
Sure. So hi everyone, I'm Alice Anderson. I work at the Science Museum of Minnesota in their Research and Evaluation Department. Just as a point of reference, I think you are automatically muted and your video is off when you join in. So if you'd like to be seen, please, you can go to, I think it's the bottom left. Pardon me, and I think it says start video. You can also turn off your mute when you want to talk. So what we thought we'd do today was just kind of talk about how Adam, myself, and Amber started working together on this idea. And that could lead into a conversation where we hear from you all about what your relationship to this topic is. So it looks like from your bios that we're talking about people who do maker education, possibly even, as boots on the ground, hands-on making as practitioners. And also what your interest in this topic about failure and helping kids persist through failures might be. Another thing we thought we could do is share with you some of the, the path we've had to trying to define failure in our own project and where we're starting to think about where we might put our definition in relation to what other people think. We can also tell you a little bit about what this project is going to look like. And one of our goals for this project is to be very collaborative as much as possible with other people in the field who are asking these questions and doing this work. And so we actually hope to have hangouts like this pretty regularly. We've talked about maybe once a month or every other month. So, this could be the start of our conversation, not the whole presentation. So I'll just kick us off and then maybe we can go around. Maybe Adam and Amber can go next, and then we'd love to hear from you all. I see Kat, I see a group from Hands-on Children's Museum. I see Deb Siegel in Los Angeles and Bethany Thomas. So it looks like we've got at least four folks. So I'll just say that my background is in art education and technology and education as well. And I think that's relevant because when I come to this work and I think about failure, I do think about the process of art making and how failure is not necessarily thought of as failure has a very iterative connotation to me when I think about the word. But when I started working with maker educators, and I've been an evaluator with Maker Ed for a few years now, I kept hearing people say, I'm working with kids who come into my space, they get frustrated with the technology or the thing that we're doing, and then they feel like they've failed and they don't want to continue. And I want to find ways to help support them, and sometimes these are drop-in activities, so I don't get to see these kids again. So how can I help kids persist? How can I help them not see themselves as a failure when a lot of the projects we do really are not meant for kids to fail anyway? It's not really the point. So that's where my wheels started turning on this project. And then Adam and I had kind of been kicking around some ideas, and he had some insights from some of the other projects that he and his colleague Amber were doing. So maybe I'll kick it over to you, Adam, and then Amber can join in as well.
Thank you. We had been looking at some making experiences happening with a local science center here and kids in an after-school program. And we were trying to help them evaluate what was happening in their program and figure out, if there was ways to improve or anything like that. And in one of the conversations after the first year, we started talking about what happens when things don't work out. And so at some point in that conversation, it sort of turned to the idea of failure, and everyone there was sort of thinking, oh, that's sort of an interesting idea. What does happen? Throwing around terms like mindset and grit and other things like persistence. And I look generally, being a researcher in science education, most of my work is on what gets people interested in STEM and what keeps them interested or why they persist. And so persistence is something I had thought about before, and sort of working through struggles, but not really in a making context. And so that plus our interest in trying to evaluate what's happening in making sort of led to some conversations between us about, is this an important component for us to start studying? And I'll pass it to Amber, maybe.
Hi, everyone. So after doing research with the Wonder Lab, we have been interviewing individuals across the STEM spectrum. And so we added that component to our interview protocol. And we asked them how failure had played a development in their role in becoming a STEM professional. And it was very different than what we were seeing with children. They did mention how failure used to be a negative thing in schools, but now it's sort of part of their process. No one really understands where the shift happens, why it happens, when this positive or this negative to positive idea of failure comes into play, but now it's sort of just this component that they embrace as part of what they do. It may be a negative sometimes, but they see it as it's a troubleshooting process to really help what they do, aid what they do, which is sort of what we want to instill in children, especially through making. I've also been interviewing Google Science Fair finalists as well, and they are speaking of failure very much like professionals in the field are speaking of failure. They accept it as part of their process in doing these science fair projects, and they embrace it as well.
Great, thank you both. Would one of our lovely faceless participants like to join lend their voice and introduce themselves?
Sure, I will. I'm Bethany Thomas. Sorry, I tried the video, but my place is so dark you couldn't see me anyhow.
No worries.
I'm with First Makerspace in Indianapolis, but my previous experience has been in a children's museum in Normal, Illinois for 14 years. So, and I've been involved with a lot of the workshops and conferences around making, and I started the Makerspace in the Children's Museum there, and now working with First Makerspace in some of the makerspaces we have in the Indianapolis public schools. So firsthand, working with the kids, both in a museum setting and an after-school setting. So same thing as you guys are saying, seeing and hearing the kids really struggling through when things don't work, wanting to give up or wanting us to tell them what to do, and making it very much a part on, we won't tell you what to do, let's work it together. Let's figure out what's going on. Let's look at how our project's turning out. Where can we do that troubleshooting? Where we can solve the problems together. It's funny you say that. Just Monday, one of my very first after-school programs with a new school had a couple meltdowns from some kids because, again, something very simple as a wheel fell off their car, and they were devastated because their car wasn't working. And so, again, just kind of having to take their hand and talk through with it and work together on figuring out what the problem was, and again, asking them questions so that they could figure it out on their own. And as soon as they had that confidence and knew that there's someone there by their side helping, they figured it out, and then they went, then they kept going forward, and then kind of that took care of it. And then they kind of then had those steps, they knew what to do. And we always iterate in our programs too, that this is the place where things aren't going to work, and that's okay. Let's work together. Let's figure it out. Help your peers. And so we talk about how that's actually learning experiences and not to take away those fears. That's a little bit. So I'm anxious to be a part and listen to what other people are doing and some of the research you guys are coming up with too.
Great. Thank you, Bethany.
Yep.
How about hands-on CM?
Hi all.
Hello.
I'm Adrienne, and this is Bryn, and this is Amanda over here out of focus here. So we have a few different maker programs that we do. I want to talk a little bit about our sort of more structured field trip workshop type programs, because I have faced challenges there with failure in making where we have 30 minutes to have kids make something or tinker with something, and oftentimes we do sort of preface like, everything will work a little bit differently. Your creation might look different from another person's creation, but still without having lots and lots of adults or teachers in the room who can help make sure each kid feels successful. There are a few kids who wind up feeling like they didn't make their robot in enough time, or they didn't complete whatever goal they set in their own heads for what they thought they needed to do. So I'm just kind of interested in maybe finding out some words to use that would introduce the concept of persistence, but also embracing that idea of failure. And yeah. And I've done that with one of the programs where at the end I sort of have kids like say like, oh, did you have a really epic fail when you did this one project? And that kind of makes it like fun and funny. And then to hear successes as well. So that's like the storytelling comes out on both ends, but it's hard to do that with some of our other programs. And then I think Bryn might have something to mention about our Makespace too.
Well, in the Makespace, it's more of a longer, especially longer than our field trip program. And
it's a drop-in program.
It's a drop-in program too. But I think the thing is like we will have the kids and the parents who will sit down and they'll do the project and they will, be determined to complete it successfully. I think the biggest, one of the things that I have I guess, well, I've noticed is that if the parent doesn't feel like they would be successful in the project, then they'll give up, and then the kid is also has given up as well.
And it's again, like they're setting their own goals for what they think is success, whereas like even just exploring it and trying something new is what our goals for their success are.
And are you done?
Yeah.
So I just wanted to add, before I was at this museum, I was at the Museum of Children's Art in Oakland. We called ourselves MoCA. And it was very arts focused, and we did a lot of school programs, and we had field trips, and we had drop-in studios. And we used the studio habits of mind. I don't know if you guys are familiar, or the art. I've also seen them as artist habits of mind. So persist was definitely a big part of what we worked with. And I felt like in that specific sort of setting, because we were so consistently, all of our staff really were deeply into the studio habits of mind, and we were so consistently putting those values out for the kids, it was a lot easier to work them through the failures. And that was even part of when we did field trips or after school programs, it was part of our structure of our curriculum, where we would hit a certain point and we would say, who's having challenges? Okay, what challenges are you having? And also doing the walking around and picking out people who were having creative ways of solving something and kind of holding those up and saying, I see something that's really interesting that's going on here, and this is how it's going together. And so in that sort of specific framework, which was definitely more art related, but had a lot of making components to it, I didn't feel like we had as many challenges. I think for us, Bryn mentioned already with the fact that our drop-in program involves the parents, a lot really depends on how engaged the parents are in helping, and how skilled the parents feel and how confident the parents feel, because definitely the parents who don't feel confident, not only do their kids kind of have that history of that, so they're more willing to give up, but then also, we have a limited number of staff people, and we can't be, helping step by step with one child through the whole time, because we've got 10 or 12 kids there that we're trying to kind of work through it.
And with the parents helping a lot, oh man, I just lost my train of thought.
It'll come back.
Okay, it'll come back.
It
Let
usually
me
does.
just summarize a couple of things I'm hearing that resonate with our group. So I heard, and Bethany too, I heard you talking about, what's the good language to use? Are there alternate words that communicate something similar but doesn't have this scary word? Or maybe going with the scary word and making it kind of funny with epic failure is actually a good way to use it. Adam and I are both parents, and so often our conversations will include personal experiences where we're talking about when do we want our kids to have an opportunity to fail and when not. I think that's a really interesting question. We can explain our project in a little bit, but I do think, and we, at the Science Museum, we see a lot of parent influence, good, bad, and other, on kids' persistence or interest in what they're doing. There was one other thing I wanted to pick. Oh, just you mentioned the habits of mind too. One thing that we were really curious about is there both language and then habits or norms, around maker education that either we as educators are using implicitly, like we don't know that we're using, or that need to be in place to have the common expectations among kids and educators. So those are some highlights that I'm hearing from our conversation so far. Let's see, would I see?
Yeah, can I ask a clarifying question? This is Adam. So when you guys say that you sort of allow them to set the expectations, how explicit is that for them? And do you sort of constrain it in any way, or do you, are they constrained by the materials, or do you constrain the tasks at all, or how does that work?
Well, for our workshop programs, it's definitely sort of instruction given ahead of time for what the goals of the activity might be. Like, for example, using our wind tunnel. You have a plain paper cone, but you need to engineer it in some way to make it, can you make it like spin? Can you make it fly really high? And I kind of leave it as open-ended as possible so that, if they make one, they want their cone, their challenge is to get to sit on the bottom, that's fine with me. But to sort of like give them some ideas for ways to change their cone to make it behave in a different way. So it's pretty open-ended, but there's definitely like suggestions of challenges or suggestions of outcomes.
And in our makerspace, in our drop-in program, we have a theme. We're actually expanding our maker program, but the way we have it right now is that we have a fairly decently sized art studio that always has recycled materials and always has like glue and tape and things like that. And then our maker program is a specific staffed program 3 days a week where we pick a theme. And so we'll be doing sewing one week, or we'll do hot glue guns, or we'll do electronics and LEDs or whatever. So there's a certain framework within that. And then within that, we'll sometimes do suggestions, like especially with sewing, we might do tooth fairy pillows for dental health month. But if a kid doesn't want to make a tooth fairy pillow and they want to sew something else, and if they want to pick some things off the recycled wall and attach them, we often have scrap fabric or whatever, they can totally do that. Like they're not limited, and there's not a set specific product that we're trying to create. Bryn remembered her thought too, so she wants to come back.
So my thought was that also when we have a lot of the parents and kids working on projects, sometimes parents or kids will see an incomplete project as a failure, whereas like, I helped a 2-year-old sew, 3 stitches, and the mom was like, I guess we're not doing this anymore. And I was like, but you did great. Wasn't sure how can we turn that situation around and like show them that it wasn't a failure, and that like it actually was a lot of like good experience for them.
Yeah. And that I would say is something that we try to, when we come up with these projects, for example, the sewing, it might be just that they sew a button on a piece of fabric, or they can actually complete a, hot pad for Thanksgiving, or, whatever it is, so that there's kind of a range so that it's not about having a product at the end. And like, for example, when we do electronics, we have circuit blocks and we have little bits, and we usually do like a collaborative kind of thing, or sometimes we'll like hot glue things together and add LEDs, so they can decide how big or how small they're going with it. And then that kind of helps too, because if we can determine early on that the parent is not willing to spend more than 15 minutes there, then we can get the kids to pick a goal that's realistic for the amount of time they have within that. Whereas, sometimes, like, especially if we're sewing, and there are times where we've made like little stuffies or whatever, and the kids want to make, whatever, and they've got this really elaborate plan, then it's kind of like, okay, let's start with, and also kind of talking to their parents and checking in of like, do you want to spend this time on it, or should we kind of move them to a simpler way to do what they're talking about doing?
Yeah, I think, time has come up a couple times, and I think that that's really important. And I think the way you said it, I talk about that in preparing teachers of, when we talk about inquiry and sort of open-ended projects, that's where you need to leverage your expertise and say, there's no, in your mind, you're saying there's no way you can actually do that with our resources and in that amount of time. So you have to sort of help them constrain it in a nice way. And then one of the things, and we might get to this later tonight, and if we don't tonight, then we will at some point, but the notion of letting them sort of decide what their goal is part of how we're trying to figure out, or how we're sort of currently defining failure, which is, we as outsiders may, have a way that we're thinking about it or defining it. But it's probably most important to make sure that the person who's actually doing the making is the one who's defining whether or not it's successful. And this is one of the things that we're actually seeing in some of the videos we're watching is it seems like, and we've got to figure out how to figure out if this is true or not, but it seems like sometimes the adults in this space have a different view of success and or failure than the kids might. And so we need to figure out like what that does, what that causes, how maybe we can address that. And so those are that's one of the things that we're trying to think through.
Sorry, I'm a little further out. So that also brings up something where within our Makespace, we have a couple grants that are supporting it right now. And so what happened?
Can you still hear us?
Yeah, we can still hear you. I think I saw that this was Samar's screen.
Okay. So anyway, within our evaluation that we've been working on, one of the things that we've noticed as we are observing kids and their parents in the Makespace is that sometimes the parents actually interfere with the kids' process. And that's one of the things that we're working on as facilitators is how do we keep the parents from stopping the kids when they're going into the inquiry and when they're not necessarily feeling failure, but feeling like their original plan didn't work and they're trying to rethink the plan, because we've noticed that sometimes the parents jump in too soon. Sometimes the parents are more discouraged than the kids, or sometimes the parents have really specific ideas of how something should turn out. And we definitely do where we encourage parents to do their own thing of like, maybe you should make your own little stuffy animal if, whatever, because they will do like, why don't you make it green or whatever, but it was really interesting. We hadn't realized quite how often that was happening until we started evaluating and actually watching, and we had to create a spot on our evaluation form for, we're watching for these various signs and markers of them doing, the things we want to see them doing. And then we notice it start to happen and a parent actually stopping it.
Yeah, I've definitely had that experience too, and the work I've done. And it makes me think that one other point I want to make is that part of the project that we'll talk about that we're really interested in is there a difference between how the kid defines what failure is and what the adult, whether that be an educator or a parent, defines failure as? Do kids see like little tiny, maybe what we, as adults might call it mistakes, as complete failures? And is that part of kind of a point of miscommunication for these settings? I'm going to have us move on so that Deb can introduce herself if she wants to.
So hello, hope you can hear me. So I'm an engineer by day. I'm a mechanical engineer, and I'm an artist, so I'm kind of a freak of nature. I do art and engineering, and they try to mix, but the industry doesn't really like it. So a few years back, some other friends of mine from work got together, and we decided that kids really need shop class, because without mechanical intuition, you really can't design anything. So, I mean, the best people that we had, I worked at a NASA center, and the best people we had designing stuff for Mars were people who had that really cool dad in a garage experience. You're building stuff for years and years, and then you go to college. And for most girls, it was like, oh, I went to college and I expected to do some hands-on, and maybe I did Legos and I carved soap and did fabric, but you didn't really have as much hands-on because the expectation wasn't that women would work in that garage, or you didn't have the dad, or you didn't have the garage. So we're doing programming that it's a mix of art, it's a mix of engineering, and it's all volunteer run. So we'll do like taking things apart, and we'll have 12 kids, we force the parents to be there, and then we'll have 8 volunteers. And what we do is we can tailor the experience. So if I'm working with a 5-year-old, I'm working on Phillips and flathead. If I'm working with a 10-year-old, I'm like, okay, not only are those gears, can you tell me why one gear is thicker than another? Can you tell me why one is metal, one is plastic? Let's plug in a battery and let's watch this whole thing move. And all of a sudden, like, they're super excited because they've made it come to life again. I also do a bunch of fabrication classes where we're using like the jeweler saw or doing soldering. But we make sure to preface everything with stories of failure first. Like when you're using a jeweler saw, it's this little teeny tiny coping saw. The blades break. Even for jewelers, the blades break. And so I said, okay, it's gonna break. It's awesome. You're gonna learn how to install this thing over and over again. And when it breaks, I'm gonna cheer. And I do it, it freaks them out, and then they get really excited and they keep on doing it. But we have parents there, and we have lots of volunteers. So what we do is when we have really disruptive parents who get in the way, we try to push them aside, either say, let the kids do the project, or something where it's just like, we're basically mentoring the parent on how to act when doing making. So I did have a pop-up book class this past weekend, and we had one parent who would not let her son use scissors or the X-Acto blade that we trained the kids on, and it was really disturbing. We kept them jumping and saying, okay, well, let's let him do it. It's a glue stick, he can probably do it. Let's let him use the scissors, he doesn't have to use the knife. And, they got 2 out of 3 hours in, and they decided to leave, and that was fine, it's their choice. All of our classes are like 2 to 3 hours, and they're voluntary. So if the kids don't want to be there, you can't help everybody, but for the most part, most parents, they either chose to participate in a helpful way, or they just stood back and watched, and that was their role, and it enabled us to really connect with the kids at their own level. Some kids will always be advanced, some will not. But we do have the privilege of having that 3-hour block rather than, the 5-minute, 15-minute exposure that you see in a museum. And I'm really glad about that. And then we also participated with Rediscover Center, which is in LA. And I think Jonathan is trying to log on. I don't know if he did by phone or not. We ran their tinkering school program. So it's a 1-week program. Kids learn handsaw, power drill, and usually they do power tools for woodworking, but in this case we didn't. And we have 15 kids and 4 instructors. And usually we had 6 or 7 instructors in the room, especially with power tools and noise. You want to have the ability to step in and be like, clamps, please use clamps. But we started off the entire session with, okay, what does frustration look like for you? What are things you can do? Okay, you can get up, you can look around. This isn't school, you're going to share. Look at other people's stuff, take a break, and we go through it. And then when the kids experience it, we go like, okay, it looks like you're frustrated, what can you do? There's still burnout. We definitely had a few kids that, there was nothing you could do, but not everybody connects with making the same way. So that's kind of my vague experience. I can also tell you from working in industry, there are companies that are super focused on perfect the first time, like JPL, and there are places like where I work now where it's like fail often and fail early, keep on iterating, keep on making, and we'll get close to the point that people actually make a mistake and never locking down a design. So they're constantly iterating and fixing, but never saying, it's okay, close enough. So I kind of see both ends of the spectrum, and I personally fail really badly. And so I really sympathize with the kids, like, yeah, I hate things not working, but we need to define working or not as something like you made it. Something else that helps is if in that time frame we have, they can do a second piece. So like they're soldering a digital domino where it responds to light and this whole thing. It takes them like, 2.5 hours to solder this thing. The second one takes them 20 minutes. And then they're like, oh, this is easy. And they realize how much they've learned. And so they realize it's not the end product, it's what they've learned that enables them to do more. So.
Very cool. Thanks, Deb. That's awesome. You're not a freak. You are among friends. And I think I did see your colleague friend Jonathan online. Jonathan, do you want to introduce yourself?
I will try. I might cut out. Also, I've got 3 kids in the background that'll come and wander in.
Well, we can hear your voice, but we can't see your face. Oh, no, there we go. All right.
So it sounds, I think, like everyone's introducing themselves and their programs. I don't know if Deb, talk a little bit about what we do together and where I should get started.
Yeah, we're just having people talk a little bit about, what you do with regards to maker education, and then what your interest might be in the topic or the word failure.
So I'm the director of Rediscover Center in Los Angeles. We're, among other things, an affiliate of Tinkering School based out of San Francisco. We run Tinkering School LA. And the tinkering philosophy that we have taken from Gever Tully's kind of dangerous things and a little bit of free-range parenting view and apply in our programs, which are slightly more crafty and a little less intense than what he's used to, but still very much engineering, art, combination, tinkering, is how we want to give space for kids to have enough time to fail and to own what they're doing rather than lead through, here's the right answer. So we spend some time on getting a baseline of skills or assessment of what a kid might be interested in, and then try to aim for an open environment where we can make suggestions but are not necessarily leading towards a goal. And within that, there's a lot of kind of, we have a 4-to-1 ratio to start with in most of our programs, so a given adult can pay pretty close attention to each of the kids in their charge if it's a team thing, or to the whole room if we've got everyone working independently. And within that, the facilitators are aiming to have a coaching model rather than a direction model. So here's what you're interested in. Where do you want to go with that? There's no right way to do it. There's no wrong way to do that. Here's some suggestions maybe. And that tends to lead towards the rise and fall of interest and ability. So that when something doesn't work, and when we're talking about failure, then they know why they're doing something, maybe, so that they can come back to it from another side. I'm babbling a little. I can think more about what we do. We talk about being a failure positive environment a lot. Anyway, come back to me. I know I'm loud, but I'll love it on a conversation.
One thing that your comment is, and others have making clear, is a couple, factors that really influence the relationship. How long you're with kids, how often you see them. This idea of if they're dictating the goal versus educator dictating the goal, if they can come back to something or not. So there's lots of variables within this that will be interesting to explore. I think we have one more person with us. It's Samar. Would you like to introduce yourself if you can?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, good. Well, my name is Samar. I'm from Palestine. We're actually working on, we're teaming up with the Exploratorium actually to create our own science center. So we're creating it ourselves, which is a big step here in Palestine. And currently we're in a step of having what we call a science studio, which is an exhibit design space, together with the science art atelier, which includes tinkering, making, and science art designed activities. So I'm in charge of this, and I'm a senior researcher, so it's actually being a tinkerer and a researcher at the same time. And failure is a very important topic. So we've had some experiences with children doing activities and tinkering and making. And yeah, failure is a big deal. Everybody thinks that they shouldn't fail, and in order to avoid failing, they always think of a successful prototype to follow, or taking safe steps so that they wouldn't fail, or they would do, try to ask you, what should I do next? And this is it happened because tinkering and making in let's say as a new learning, or as a culture, it has also, it's new, and people are more perfectionists. If you don't do it right, then it hasn't been done, and they think that doing it right means doing it the same way, everybody doing the same product, everybody doing it the same way. So when you give them that choice to open up and do things differently, it kinds of make them afraid. And when they find that they're doing something different, they just stop. And I notice them. They look at each other. They're waiting for me as a facilitator to tell one of them, yeah, this is it. So that they would, stop doing what they are doing and just move along with the successful one, as if that would be the only successful one. And when we just use the words that everything is acceptable, you have your own way, you're thinking in your own way. At first, the children we used to deal with, they got shocked by the idea that it's not really shocked, but it was strange for them to believe that every prototype is acceptable, every way they think of. I worked with, for example, today I had a workshop with the sewing circuits, and it was with families. So they were mostly females and mothers and their daughters who came in. We have a festival running on here. So they wanted to do the same thing. Tell us what's the step. So when they did different products at the end, and they were really good, they enjoyed it a lot. But what I have in mind is, when we design an activity or when we work with the people, do we create do we create opportunities for failure? Should we do that, or should it let it happen? But sometimes I think, yeah, we can create these opportunities, and it's important that we create them, especially in our case, because we're introducing a new culture of learning. I know the problems that which are common, I mean, to everybody. They are the same. But this is the question that interests me more, is whether we should create or just wait for them to happen. Sometimes I think that we can create them, and creating them is fun for me as a researcher, not in the sense of, I enjoy how people react to them. And creating them is sometimes through using a tool, or missing a material, or just, stepping back and looking how would they react to it. So sometimes, for example, I had an activity with springs, and the idea was that they would make their own spring. So they had different types of wires and different rods just laying around, and I had these small power tools, and for them to choose which spring to make was the starting point, instead of designing something and looking what spring it needs. And at that point of when they made the springs and then they didn't know what to do with them, they just stopped. It was a block. So the starting point they used to enter into the activity, I left them to choose their starting point, which is, the free choice. So they started at, I don't think it's wrong, but maybe because it was their first time also in tinkering and making, they didn't do a design. They made a tool, or they chose a material, but they couldn't go beyond. So they just stopped. and you would feel that in the whole room, because they look at each other, most of them imitate the same steps. And then I have to deal with that. How would I do that? I try, sometimes I don't know if that's what the facilitator should do, but I try to connect with their ideas, and sometimes I feel that I'm cheating myself, and I don't know what others would do, but sometimes I feel that I'm cheating when I'm trying to connect designs with steps that they are in. I don't know if I'm telling you what I want to say, because, for example, one of them did a big spring. It doesn't fit a toy he wanted to design. So I had to work with him to change his design, but in a way that I felt that I'm sort of imposing a relationship between his ideas and what he has in mind, so that he would avoid failure. I mean, that position of a facilitator is really, really difficult. You want them to succeed, but you don't want to cheat. You want to be a real facilitator. you want that challenge of failure, because it's actually when they get over it is that I feel that real learning happens. And that's it. When I organize my ideas more, I'll tell you more.
That was thank you, Smart. That was really wonderful to hear those examples. I think we've already found that by talking about actual examples, actual things that happened to us that we observed has helped us narrow our definition or whatever scope that we want to take. So it's 7:42, which is great. I personally really enjoyed hearing about everything you are all working on. I guess what I'd suggest is that maybe we take a couple minutes for Adam, if you maybe want to explain just our very short 18-month project, which, by the way, we already have 1 month down, so a 17-month project to figure all this out. No big deal. Just to talk a little bit about what we're going to be trying to do and what we wrote to do, and then maybe highlight a couple of the I don't quite know what to call it, but they're almost like boundaries that I've heard us talk about, or variables maybe, and that might flow out of Adam, our description of how we're looking at different settings. Does that sound?
Yeah, can I chime in? Samara, I'm really compelled by what you said, because no one has mentioned this before, but the idea that you're afraid to be different, that failure is based on how you see your peer, maybe, that you are, what's the word, evaluating yourself in regards to maybe the person next to you, and that you're afraid to be different, and so you're afraid to fail. That to me has not been brought up, and I find that very interesting, that you're not the norm, maybe. And so are you a failure because you're not the norm, is sort of what I picked up from what you were saying. So I'm very drawn to that, actually. With a lot of the research that I do, it seems something to explore a little more in regards to, are we comparing ourselves to people, and that's what defines a failure, as opposed to we're not meeting our goal, or maybe it's both.
Yeah.
So thank you for sharing that.
Thank you. I think it comes a bit from the idea of being in a classroom with mates. So if you have the same homework, the same answers, then you're okay. If you don't have the same homework, the same answers, then you're out of the group. And it comes in, you can narrow it down even when you have a teacher who would say that this is a mathematics question. If you solve it this way and get the answer, then this way is the correct way. And if you solve it differently, and even if you get the same answer, then it's not. So these complications of learning that happen in the school, in the formal system, actually reflect in this informal space, especially for students who are tinkering and making for their first time. And especially in our context, where informal learning is just being introduced newly to the system. So people just come in and they want to learn, and learning for them is school learning. So that free self-expressive opportunity is still, and it's not within their zone of thinking yet. So they're exploring it, and that's what we're working on from different sides. That's why we work with them on the festival. We work with them on other informal learning opportunities where we'll try to introduce those ideas.
Yeah, that's I think that's a great way to put it. And one of the things that we're talking about as a team is we do want, and I'll try to fit this in, a response to that also fitting in with what Alice was sort of getting at before. We're trying to investigate failure as part of making, figure out what that means, figure out what it means for each group involved. So sort of what it might mean for the kids participating in it, what it might mean for the educators, and those educators, because we're going to look across some different environments, might be from they might be formal classroom teachers who are trying to implement making within schools. They might be informal science educators at a makerspace, at a museum, or where we started, which is what we call sort of a hybrid, which is some folks from the local science center going into an after-school setting. Okay. So sort of going from informal into a formal setting, but yet still offering something that looks a little less like typical school. And at some point, we're interested in the bigger picture of, how this might actually revolutionize the way kids are learning and those sorts of things. And one of the things, Samar, that you said that was really striking to me is, and something that we've been talking about, is this notion of, do we just let failure happen? Do we set up a context or a type of scenario where failure is hiding in there somewhere and we expect that a lot of the kids will find it? Or do we actually purposefully try to trigger it in some way because we think there can be some positive response or learning as an outcome? And that's actually sort of the tail end of our project. We got funded by NSF, and one of the requirements for funding was it had to be somewhat risky. And so our level of risk is a little bit scary for us to get into, but at the end, the idea is, can we actually trigger failure in the kids? And then, if we know how to address it, or maybe how to guide educators in addressing it to lead to persistence or perseverance or learning, can we trigger it? And then do we see these sort of positive outcomes coming from it? Before we get there, of course, and I think we probably won't ever feel comfortable causing kids to fail. But before we get to that point, what we want to do and what we need to do is really try to do some, I think of it as sort of naturalistic observation of what is happening in making in some school settings, in some informal settings, in these hybrid settings. And we're not going to, we don't have the money or the time to make this a sort of generalizable finding, but really trying to get a sense of what that looks like, both from, again, ideally from the kids' perspective and from the educator's perspective, and not just from our own perspective. And we're going to go through a couple different, I can talk about this probably some other time or offline if people are more interested in exactly how we might try to do that. But the idea is that we use that to make some sense of what's happening there. And then we start thinking toward, and a lot of our friends have asked us, okay, well, I know this has just started, but what are you seeing that we could use as educators to sort of help? And we don't think we're there yet, but one of the things we are sort of looking for in this, or making ourselves look for, are what we're calling right now promising practices that seem to lead to the outcomes that we would like to see. And what's interesting is that the same educator might go through a cycle of sort of not so great practices and then promising practices all at the same time. It's not like somebody just becomes an expert and they do, what we want all the time, or what's going to lead to a positive outcome. And so right now we're thinking some of these are just actually little prompts, right? So rather than, we were seeing a lot of just them fixing it for the child, rather than, asking the kid, what would you do next? Or what do you think? Or how would you analyze this? And so it might be something as simple as that, but it might be something a little more complex too. And so we're going to look at failing happening in making. We're focusing on middle school because we figure that at that age they probably have enough verbal capabilities that they can they can help both think about what's happening in the moment and verbalize it more easily than if we went with really young children. And so we picked that target age of middle school, but clearly, there's going to be some applicability of what we find to sort of others. And I saw somebody mentioned, for adults too. And yeah, I'm really interested in actually how the adults, whether it's the parents or the facilitators, bring their own baggage around failure into this and how that can influence. And baggage probably isn't the right word, but potentially it's positive experiences or ways that they can help do failure analysis or something like that. But how those things can influence how the kids think about the failing that's happening in what they're doing.
Can
Do
I
we want
say
to just
something?
keep talking, or what do you guys want to do? We could go to our definition, but I don't know.
I have just one thing more to say, if you don't mind.
Please.
Okay, I don't think that, or I think that if we were to look at failure, we also have to look at two more concepts, which are cheating and sharing. Students come in from the formal system where cheating means for them looking at what others are doing, and if it's successful, then we can do it. Then for them, it's cheating. For us in the thinking spaces, it's learning from your peers. Because you see a successful example, you try to take it, look at it. Even if you do it the same way, it doesn't mean that you're cheating. It means that you are learning. That's one thing. The other thing is sharing. Because some of the students, being in the competitive formal system where they compete with others, they just, they take a side. They don't want you to see how they're successful they are working. So they step aside. They don't interact. They socially don't interact with others working. They just, they take a station for themselves alone. So they don't share. So if we are to look at failure, and it's not just us facilitating, it's not just teachers or facilitators, it's how the failure, cheating, and sharing are happening. It's very important, and it does help children to overcome points of failure. If they share what they do, if they socially interact with what they are doing with others, doing the thinking process, if they speak out what they are doing, and wow, it worked, no, it didn't. These moments of sharing and learning from others, which is not cheating, it's learning from others, these two concepts I found important in my work. So if I overcome them, failure has lower chances to happen. And even if it happens, they help each other to overcome it. As a small social, short-term community working.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, a couple things that are just coming up in the chat, and that what you just said, I wanted to point out that first Deb asks, if we're concerned that by middle school, that the habits kids have will already be embedded, there. And we definitely, we've seen that in the video data that we're already, I think we all know that from our own experience too. By middle school, you may already identify yourself as a failure or not, period. And that likely contributes to whatever you do, even in this seemingly, very exploratory, open-ended space. I think that's something we'd like to explore more, but for this project, we'll probably, I don't know how exactly we'll answer that in this project. In a comprehensive way, I guess you could say. What was the other thing I wanted to say? Yeah, and I think that we've also talked within our team too about how, sorry, so let me take a step back and just say that, we can say that making, arts and design, engineering, those are experiences that are common to lots of after school science center, children's museum experiences. They can be very playful, they can be very experimental, and that kids return to these types of experiences in lots of settings. As a human developing, you are different every time you return to those settings, and those experiences every time you're getting another year older. And so what developmental component do we need to attend to as we think about these questions too? That's really something we're have in the back of our minds, and would love to have a community like this to check ourselves and how we're thinking, and how middle school would be really different from third graders.
if you guys don't mind if I hop in. So going back a little bit, I just wanted to mention two things. First of all, as far as the built-in failures, depending, but especially in field trips and like those kind of longer experiences, I try to incorporate testing. So for example, engineering structures, we would actually, like 10 or 15 minutes in, have an earthquake test, and we'd have everybody pick theirs up and shake them around a little bit and then see, is your structure withstanding this kind of movement, or do you need to do something to adjust it? And I think, you know, it depends on obviously what the activity is, but like paper circuits or something like that, before they get too elaborate with their design, doing a test so that the failure comes earlier when it's easier to correct and it's not as tragic. And then another thing, just mentioning that whole cheating thing, which I think that's definitely more of an issue in a classroom setting or a field trip or something like that versus like the drop-in kind of thing. But we would always say, you know, especially when you have the kind of art framework of it, a little bit more than just the maker framework, but it's not cheating, it's getting inspired by. And then to me, that is really one of the core components of the maker. The whole maker idea is that there is that peer-to-peer learning. So I always try to kind of reframe that as, what does that person know that you don't know? Or what do you know that that person doesn't know? How can you share your knowledge? So it's that rather than copying. And then also talking about how if you're being inspired, you're not doing exactly the same thing, but you're taking the really great ideas, or you're taking something that somebody's learned that you don't know yet, and you're incorporating it into like.
Can I ask you something, Amanda? We have thought about this, and we've not actually examined videos too much yet, but when kids work collaboratively, failure doesn't seem to be such a negative thing than when you're working by yourself, because it's more like you're sharing this struggle or it didn't work together, and it's not like, oh, it was just me. Do you see that in the work that you're doing?
Yeah, and definitely I would say, you know, as I mentioned, our program, the actual maker program is 3 days a week, and it's a guided program. And when Bryn and I are making our schedule, we try to put a certain number of collaborative projects in. And sometimes we'll do where there's a collaborative element and an individual element, because there are some kids who just don't want to collaborate, and there are some kids who do. But I really see that as a big picture thing of part of what I'm trying to encourage is having them collaborate and learn to collaborate and learn to learn from each other.
It seems to be also talking about, you know, the expectations that you're setting up too. I think that's really going to be key for thinking and evaluating, you know, what we're doing in all these programs. I just wanted to add one piece that I think we really started thinking about this in terms of when you are as an individual maker making something that and an outcome doesn't turn out the way you think it will, so that there is some sort of product or presentation piece attributed or associated with it. But I think we know that making looks a lot different in a lot of different places. So I don't know that we'll hold on to that as a must have. Just because we know that so many experiences can be brief, and, you know, certainly at our museum, it's all drop-in. We don't actually have any ongoing after-school programs. We have summer camps, but that's about it. But the idea of having a final product and then you're, you know, seeing if it's failed or not isn't maybe realistic to a lot of programs. I don't know.
Yeah, I'm wondering, being mindful of everyone's time here, and the fact that we do want these to be sort of ongoing conversations. Maybe we should have had a disclaimer up front of like, we don't have any answers. But yeah, I don't know. Are there any sort of final comments before we break off? And let me know maybe in the chat if people would want to share emails or something, and we can at least keep in touch that way if you can't join other calls or something like that. But sort of, I'll leave that up to you guys if you want to if you want us to keep you posted on things that we're doing, or at some point, include you in future conversations other than just the Aztec email blast, let me know, and we can coordinate sharing that. But otherwise, I guess, if there's any sort of final thoughts, or things that you really think we should focus on, that would be awesome to share.
Does anyone want us to strap GoPro cameras on your kids?
Yeah, that's frequently how we're collecting data. Is we've got kids wearing GoPros participating in the making, and we're coding the videos that are coming from those. But
so I just, okay, I know that we joined in today to talk about it, but what are other steps ahead? Is it just sharing our experience, or I'm a bit mixed up?
Yeah. So, are you asking for these sort of get-togethers? What we're thinking of?
Yes, please.
Yeah. So, we're still trying to figure that out. This is the first one, but what our thinking is that we would use these. They would always be open like this, but we would use these to help us think through what's going on, what you all are seeing, what people who are doing this day to day are seeing, and that what we would probably do in the next couple meetings would be to bring together either some researchers or some educators, probably not little kids because that's probably not going to work out, but people who are sort of looking at this issue from different perspectives, and probably asking them to sort of contribute or talk about their work or their thoughts for a little bit at the beginning, and then open it up to more broader conversation. But our idea with this was mostly to keep the field abreast of anything that we're seeing, but more importantly that we know that what we're talking about, what we're seeing, what we're thinking about is more grounded in a sort of broader range of viewpoints and experiences. And so that was what we were thinking of for this. And toward the end, again, it might be a little bit more of us presenting what we're seeing. But really the idea, at least at the start, is for this to be a forum to have people talk about it that others might want to hear from, and really just have people sharing about their experiences and what's worked and what's not.
Okay, good.
I wanted to throw a question in the mix, and granted this is like right at the end, but a lot of the feeling of failure, which is very independent from actual failure, is a perception. So does everyone know what imposter syndrome is, or I can explain it real quick? So there's this feeling often among minorities, women, that kind of thing, in tech fields. It either starts in high school, college, work. It's at any point where all of a sudden you feel like you're overwhelmed and you're just not smart enough. There's this feeling where like, oh, the reason it didn't work perfectly the first time is because I shouldn't be here. I don't deserve to be here. I didn't deserve to get into blank school. They're really going to fire me because I'm too stupid to be here. And so rather it being an external thing, like it didn't work well this time and I'll fix it, it becomes a very personal experience of something is actually wrong with you. And I struggled with this. It only hit me when I started working at NASA. And it wasn't my first job, and I don't get it in my current place because it's a much friendlier, much more iterative experience. But a lot of kids, especially minorities, will experience this much younger, especially if it's involving tools or guys. Like, if you say machine shop, girls are gonna run away screaming. If you say tinkering with a power drill, it's a little bit easier. And so try to make our classes more approachable so that kids don't get scared off initially, and then we make sure to have lots of women, and we also make it really simple and fun, and we reteach everyone regardless. But I just want to raise a flag to keep that in mind, because I personally struggle with it. And this is my own art, my own technical stuff. I know it's there, and I know I can't turn it off. So good luck.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for bringing that up. We actually were just talking about that in my class yesterday with graduate students. But that's something that, and one of the comments I wrote earlier was that one of the other influences from this was Amber and I had started a project looking at STEM professionals and what got them interested, why they persisted, those sorts of things. And that came up, I think, through the lens of sort of identity. Do they see themselves as an engineer? Do they see themselves as fitting? And I think that came up in some of those stories. And so, so it's definitely at least on our radar. I was hoping and hadn't thought so much that it would be really prevalent in these younger children, but I think it's still something for us to think about. And my example of it would be, I remember almost not yelling at, but being frustrated with parents who on parents' night when I was teaching in 6th grade would come in and say, oh, well, like, it's scary for me to even be in a science room now because, I'm allergic to science or something like that. And I quickly learned to say, whatever you do, please don't share that with your kids, because they come in and think that off the bat, they can't do this. And there's no evidence that they can't, or that it's genetic or anything like that. And so, so that's one of the things we're looking at is how these various factors couple together in either an aggregate form or, how that works in terms of, does the sort of prior thinking, prior views on the world, prior experiences couple with a couple bad experiences in the event to lead to them furthering their thinking that they can't do it? Or, as we were talking in a meeting earlier today, trying to figure out how the positive experiences and negative experiences couple with their perception of self-efficacy, and do the negative experiences really draw down on the self-efficacy where the positive experiences only add a little bit, and trying to think through all of that. And so the idea of the sort of imposter syndrome, I think, comes into play there as well.
I also think there's interesting questions around relationship to the tool or the material between, when we talk about this a lot with technology, where you say like, oh, this thing can do this thing for me. This thing can look up Google Maps for me. And then a difference of that being, I can make this thing do things for me that I want it to do. So moving from consumer to producer is one way to put it, but I think it's a little more complex than that. Who or what has the, how can you make the tools do what you want? And do you even believe that you can make tools do things? Or do they just do the things and then you react to them? What's your relationship to the tools, I think, is another piece of it.
Yeah. Thinking through tools, extensions of our minds, of their minds. I just want to go to Adam's notes about parents. What I'm having with parents here is very positive, actually, and they keep on telling their children, if we had these opportunities, we would have learned science in a much way. So actually, they are encouraging them to be part of the activities that we're trying to make with thinking and making, and they get amazed. I mean, one session when I did the soldering with 8-year-old girls, not boys, girls, for their parents, when they came in and they saw what they did, they felt so much empowered. And we're actually working with thinking and making because we believe in, it's our foundation's mission that we need to empower people and, yes, turn them from users into producers. And this is important. And it's actually working along with the whole thing of learning and technology that's going on. I mean, with Arduinos, Raspberry Pi, with everything, these bits that are being created here and there, they are all turning us from users into producers because now we are in control. But I think that before going into technology, to overcome the fears of tools, because with students and I mean young age people are being drawn into the internet and the whole idea of sitting and doing nothing except having these devices in their hands. They got a bit alienated from using tools. I mean, a needle is becoming something that is difficult for some to use. they can't thread a needle. They don't use it anymore. So that's something we have to, I think, overcome and work with children on using tools and their fears of sometimes using especially power tools or when you introduce new technologies, and then move into technology or do it together. But the idea is the hands need to return to work and think. So it's not just thinking in their minds, they have to think with their hands. And that might overcome failure. It helps.
Deb, one thing that you brought up gender in one of your comments, and you brought it from this viewpoint of the student, but I am interested too, probably after this, to go back and look at the video data, is how the teachers respond to failure. Is it different based on whether you're a boy or a girl? Because I think there's a lot of biases that educators have that they're not aware of. And so do they do it for the girls versus the question to the boys? I mean, are there differences in how they approach it based on their gender, or maybe like they're a different race or ethnicity or something like that?
Yeah, or I wonder if they'd push boys a little bit harder. You know, one of the things we've talked about is as an educator knowing sort of how far you can push a kid before to try things or to be out of their comfort zone before they would quit. And so I can sort of imagine that there might be this conception that you can be a little bit harder or more forceful with the boys and push them to a greater extent without them quitting or breaking down or something than the girls. But you know, we haven't seen that exactly yet, but I wonder.
Well, I think girls are more tolerant. They keep on if I just now at a quick glance of boys and girls in my space, I think girls are more perseverant. But what I face is two things. One, teachers are worse than parents. And the way they take it so personal if they are with students and the students don't, between brackets, do well. Because they feel that they're the science students and this is something that's related to science, and if they don't do it right, it's their teachers to blame. So I don't like having teachers around. Not all of them, of course, but yeah, in most cases, it's harder to work with them than parents, because sometimes parents, okay, they accept their children. They try to push them hard, but they accept them. But for teachers, it's more difficult. Now, with boys and girls, I found that girls are more perseverant. They keep on doing, and sometimes they push the boys. I had this once with the spring activities. I had one boy and one girl. I thought they knew each other, and it turned out that no, they only knew themselves, each other through the activity. But I described them like this. They were just two married persons for 60 years. They get to begin, she gets to lead the way and he gets to follow. And this is exactly how it worked. They just got into doing the activity and she was leading him. No, don't stop. Let's do more. And he would, follow up with her. That was very interesting to watch.
I think there's possibility for the, effect that, so let's, I think I probably tend to agree with you that, girls may be more perseverant or keep it more to themselves if they are struggling or failing. But to have that influence in a group of boys who are, I don't know. I'm just saying, I guess my point is just, the mix of having those different perspectives. And as the folks from the hands-on museum were talking about, sort of pointing out successful strategies or something has really the potential to benefit everyone.
Yeah, I'm going to say we should probably, on that note, I think we should probably call it here and come back when we can. And like I said, if I really appreciate you guys participating in this, and we're hoping to do much more of this. if you really are interested in more of the conversation or more of the literature we're looking at and stuff, let us know. I think if you found this through Aztec, which I'm assuming you did, my email, I'm pretty sure was on there. I can post it here too. But otherwise, we'll be back with meetings. We'll probably try to sneak one in December. And if we can't get that one, then we'll definitely do one in mid-January or early January. But yeah, really interested to learn more about what everyone's doing and how they're dealing with this. But thank you very much for participating.
Yeah, nice to meet you all.
All
Nice
right.
to meet you all. Thank you a lot.
Good night.
Good night.
Night. It's already night. It's 3 a.m. in my country.
Yes, good morning. Good morning. I was wondering.
I didn't put the camera on because I'm in my PJs. Okay.
Well, I hope you have a great day, Samar.
Thank you very much. Yeah, today is a weekend. Yeah, today.
Right.
Now today, it's a weekend.
Right. All right.
Okay. I'll see you
Take
soon.
care.
Bye-bye.